Grandpa with Alzheimer's cooks secret recipe at Christmas. Surprise ingredient reveals family secret buried for decades. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy the story. When a forgotten recipe resurfaces in the hands of a grandfather battling Alzheimer's, Christmas dinner becomes a gateway to long-buried family secrets. As the aroma of nostalgia fills the air, the Wheelers are about to discover that some ingredients are meant to stay hidden, and others have the power to heal wounds decades in the making. The persistent December chill nipped at Olivia Wheeler's cheeks as she hurried up the snow-dusted pathway to her childhood home. The two-story colonial, with its faded red bricks and white trim, stood as a sentinel of memories both cherished and painful. Strings of multicolored Christmas lights twinkled half-heartedly in the fading afternoon light, a far cry from the dazzling displays of Olivia's youth. Balancing a cardboard box of hastily wrapped presents and a bag of last-minute groceries, Olivia fumbled for her keys. The wreath on the front door, threadbare and missing half its pine cones, swayed in the wind. She couldn't help but sigh. It was just another reminder of how much things had changed since her mother's passing 2 years ago. As she pushed open the door, a cacophony of voices spilled out into the crisp winter air. The warmth of the house enveloped her, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of cinnamon and... Was that Sage? "I'm home," Olivia called out, kicking off her snow-crusted boots. Her younger sister, Megan, appeared from the living room, a harried expression on her face. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, helping Olivia with her burdens. "Grandpa's acting weird again." Olivia's heart sank. Their grandfather, Arthur Wheeler, had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 3 years ago. The once vibrant and quick-witted man who had practically raised them after their father's death was now a shadow of his former self, prone to confusion and occasionally disconcerting bouts of lucidity. "Define weird," Olivia prompted, following Megan toward the kitchen. "He insists on cooking Christmas dinner," Megan explained, her voice low. "Says he has a special recipe he needs to make. Mom always handled the big meals. And you know Grandpa was never much of a cook, even before." She trailed off, but Olivia understood. Before the fog of Alzheimer's had settled over their grandfather's mind like a heavy blanket. As they rounded the corner into the kitchen, Olivia's eyes widened. The scene before her was one of controlled chaos. Every available surface was covered with ingredients. Jars of spices, bowls of chopped vegetables, and cuts of meat she couldn't immediately identify. In the center of it all stood Arthur Wheeler, his white hair sticking up at odd angles, wearing an apron that had seen better days. "Livy!" he exclaimed, his face lighting up as he spotted her. For a moment, Olivia saw a flash of the grandfather she remembered, the one who used to sneak her extra cookies and taught her how to change a tire. "You're just in time. I need your help with Grandma Ellie's secret stuffing." Olivia exchanged a puzzled glance with Megan. Their grandmother Ellie had passed away long before either of them was born, and they'd never heard of any secret family recipes. "Grandpa," Olivia began gently, approaching him, "I thought we agreed that I would handle Christmas dinner this year. Why don't you sit down and relax?" Arthur's bushy eyebrows furrowed, a stubborn set to his jaw that Olivia recognized all too well. "Nonsense," he said, waving a flour-covered hand dismissively. "It has to be me. The recipe won't work otherwise." There was an urgency in his voice that gave Olivia pause. She'd learned that sometimes, in dealing with her grandfather's condition, it was better to redirect than to contradict. "Okay," she said slowly. "Why don't you tell me about this recipe? Maybe I can help." Arthur's eyes darted around the kitchen, as if checking for eavesdroppers. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's not just stuffing, Livy. It's the key to everything." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside ran down Olivia's spine. There was something in her grandfather's tone, a clarity she hadn't heard in months, that made her heart race. "The key to what, Grandpa?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Arthur opened his mouth to respond, but his gaze suddenly went distant, unfocused. The moment of lucidity had passed as quickly as it had come. He blinked rapidly, looking around the kitchen in confusion. I can't remember," he mumbled, his shoulders sagging. "It was important. Why can't I remember?" Olivia's heart broke a little at the frustration and fear in her grandfather's voice. She gently took his arm, guiding him to a chair at the kitchen table. "It's okay, Grandpa. Why don't you sit here and direct me? You can tell me what to do, and I'll be your hands. How does that sound?" Arthur nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his face. Yes, that might work. But you have to promise to follow the recipe exactly. No substitutions." "I promise," Olivia said solemnly, even as her mind raced with questions. What was this mysterious recipe? And why did her grandfather believe it was so crucial? As she began to gather the ingredients under Arthur's watchful eye, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that this Christmas was going to be unlike any other. Little did she know, the secret hidden within her grandmother's stuffing recipe would unearth a family mystery buried for decades, forever changing the Wheelers' understanding of their past and their future. The kitchen hummed with activity as Olivia followed her grandfather's increasingly erratic instructions. Megan hovered nearby, alternating between helping and shooting worried glances at their grandfather. Outside, the early winter darkness had settled in, and the warm glow of the kitchen lights reflected off the falling snow, creating a cozy atmosphere that belied the tension in the room. "Now, this is the tricky part," Arthur said, his roomy eyes suddenly sharp with focus. "You need to add the secret ingredient." Olivia paused, wooden spoon poised over the bowl of stuffing mixture. "What secret ingredient, Grandpa?" Arthur's brow furrowed, and for a heart-stopping moment, Olivia feared he'd slipped back into confusion. But then he snapped his fingers, eyes lighting up. "The box. In the attic, there's an old recipe box. Your grandmother's. The ingredient is hidden there." Megan and Olivia exchanged glances. In all the years they'd lived in this house, they'd never come across such a box. "I'll go check," Megan volunteered, clearly eager for a break from the kitchen's charged atmosphere. As Megan's footsteps receded up the stairs, Olivia turned back to her grandfather. "Grandpa, can you tell me more about this recipe? When did Grandma Ellie used to make it?" Arthur's gaze grew distant, a wistful smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, it was a long time ago, before you girls were born. Before your father." He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. Olivia's breath caught. Their father's death when they were young had always been a sensitive subject, shrouded in a veil of sadness that neither their mother nor grandfather seemed willing to pierce. "What about Dad?" Olivia pressed gently, sensing they were on the verge of something important. But Arthur shook his head, the moment lost. "The stuffing, Livy. We need to finish the stuffing." Just then, Megan burst back into the kitchen, clutching a battered tin box. "I found it!" she exclaimed, slightly out of breath. It was buried under a bunch of old photo albums. Olivia took the box, a thin layer of dust coating its surface. The lid was adorned with faded painted flowers, and as she opened it, the musty scent of age wafted up. Inside, dozens of yellowed recipe cards were neatly organized. "Which one is it, Grandpa?" Olivia asked, rifling through the cards. Arthur leaned forward, squinting at the box's contents. His gnarled finger pointed to a card near the back. "That one. Ellie's Christmas Comfort." Olivia pulled out the indicated card. The handwriting was elegant but faded, the paper fragile with age. As she scanned the ingredients, her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Grandpa, this can't be right. One of the ingredients listed is a key." Arthur nodded vigorously. Yes, the old brass key. It should be taped to the back of the card." Sure enough, when Olivia flipped the recipe over, a small, tarnished brass key was affixed to the cardstock with a brittle piece of tape. She carefully removed it, holding it up to the light. It looked ordinary enough, the kind of key that might open an old chest or cabinet. "We're supposed to put this in the stuffing?" Megan asked incredulously. No, Arthur said, shaking his head. The key opens the drawer where the real secret ingredient is kept. Olivia's mind was reeling. What drawer? What secret ingredient could possibly be so important that it needed to be locked away? Grandpa, she began slowly. Where is this drawer? Arthur's face scrunched up in concentration. In the study, the old roll-top desk. There's a hidden compartment. Olivia and Megan shared another look. The antique desk had been a fixture in their grandfather's study for as long as they could remember, but they'd never known about any hidden compartments. I'll go check it out, Megan offered, taking the key from Olivia. You stay here and keep an eye on things. As Megan left the kitchen once more, Olivia turned back to her grandfather, determined to unravel more of this mystery. Grandpa, why is this recipe so important? What's it got to do with Dad? Arthur's eyes, which had been following Megan's exit, snapped back to Olivia. There was a clarity in them that she hadn't seen in months, perhaps years. Your father, he said, his voice low and urgent. There's something you need to know about the night he died. Olivia's heart began to race. For years, the circumstances surrounding her father's death had been a taboo subject in their family. All she and Megan knew was that he died in a car accident on a snowy night much like this one. What about it, Grandpa? She pressed, leaning in close. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but at that moment, a startled cry echoed from the direction of the study. Both Olivia and her grandfather turned toward the sound. Megan, Olivia called out, worry coloring her voice. When there was no immediate response, she rose to her feet. I should go check on her. No! Arthur's hand shot out, gripping Olivia's wrist with surprising strength. You have to finish the recipe. It's the only way to make things right. Torn between concern for her sister and the urgent plea in her grandfather's eyes, Olivia hesitated. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken with tension, the cheerful Christmas lights outside now feeling more ominous than festive. Just as Olivia was about to pull away from her grandfather's grasp, Megan reappeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face was pale, and in her trembling hands, she held a small, ornate box. Liv, Megan said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not going to believe what I found. As Megan stepped further into the kitchen, the box clutched tightly to her chest. Olivia felt as though she were standing on the precipice of a truth that would change everything. Whatever secret lay hidden in that box, whatever mystery was woven into the threads of their grandmother's recipe, one thing was clear. This Christmas was about to unearth long-buried secrets that would shake the very foundations of the Wheeler family. The kitchen fell silent as Megan placed the ornate box on the table. Its polished mahogany surface gleamed under the warm kitchen lights, the intricate carvings along its edges hinting at its age and value. Olivia's eyes darted between the box, her sister's pale face, and their grandfather's suddenly alert expression. Open it, Arthur urged, his voice barely above a whisper. With trembling hands, Megan lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a small glass vial filled with a dark, earthy substance, and beside it, a folded piece of paper that had yellowed with age. Olivia reached for the paper, carefully unfolding it. Her eyes widened as she recognized her grandmother's elegant handwriting. It's a letter, she breathed, scanning the contents. Dated December 24th, 1972. Read it, Arthur insisted, leaning forward in his chair. Read it aloud. Olivia cleared her throat, her voice wavering slightly as she began to read. My dearest Arthur, if you're reading this, then the time has come for the truth to be revealed. The secret I've carried these many years weighs heavily on my soul, and I can no longer bear to take it to my grave. The herb in the vial is the true secret ingredient of our family's Christmas stuffing. It's a rare variety of sage, found only in a hidden valley where your grandfather once lived. But its significance goes far beyond its culinary use. On that fateful Christmas Eve in 1972, when we thought we'd lost everything, this herb saved us all. You see, it possesses properties that can temporarily clear the mind of even the most intoxicated person. When mixed with food, it's virtually undetectable. That night, when Frank arrived at our door, drunk and raging about the money he'd lost, about the debts that threatened to destroy us all. I knew I had to act. I mixed the herb into his coffee, praying it would work as your grandfather had once told me it would. It did. Frank's mind cleared, and in that moment of lucidity, we were able to reason with him. We made a plan, one that would save our family from ruin, but at a terrible cost. We agreed never to speak of it again, to protect the children from the truth. But secrets have a way of poisoning the soul, my love. I've watched you struggle with the weight of our decision for decades. It's time to lift that burden. The herb in this vial is the last of its kind. Use it wisely, and may it bring the peace and clarity we've all been searching for. With all my love, Ellie. As Olivia's voice trailed off, a heavy silence descended upon the kitchen. The cheerful Christmas decorations seemed out of place now, at odds with the gravity of the revelation. Megan was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, what is she talking about? What happened that night?" Arthur's eyes were distant, filled with a mixture of pain and relief. "Your father," he began slowly. "Frank, he wasn't the man you girls remember. The accident that took his life, it wasn't an accident at all." Olivia felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "What are you saying, Grandpa?" Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath. "That Christmas Eve, back in '72, your father had gotten in deep with some bad people. Gambling debts. He came to us, desperate and drunk, talking about ending it all. Your grandmother, she saved him that night. Saved us all. But the car accident," Megan began, her voice trailing off as realization dawned. "Was a cover story," Arthur finished. "We helped Frank disappear, started a new life far away from here. The accident was our way of protecting you girls from the truth, from the shame of what he'd done." Olivia's mind reeled. The father she'd idolized, the tragic hero who died too young, had been a fiction, a story crafted to protect her and Megan from a harsher reality. Is he still alive?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. Arthur shook his head sadly. "No, sweetheart. He passed away a few years ago, peaceful in his sleep. He'd made a good life for himself in the end. Always regretted leaving you girls, but he knew it was for the best." As the weight of this revelation settled over them, Olivia found herself reaching for the vial of herb. "And this is what saved him that night?" Arthur nodded. "Your grandmother believed it had almost magical properties. Clarity of mind, she called it. Said it could cut through any fog, be it drink or—" He gestured vaguely at his own head, a rueful smile on his face. Suddenly, Olivia understood. "That's why you wanted to make the stuffing. You remembered, didn't you? You wanted to clear your mind, to tell us the truth." "I've been trying to remember for so long," Arthur admitted, tears glistening in his eyes. "I knew there was something important, something I needed to tell you girls. But every time I got close, it slipped away." Megan reached out, taking her grandfather's hand. "We understand, Grandpa, and we don't blame you. Any of you. You did what you thought was best." As the three of them sat there, surrounded by the half-prepared Christmas dinner, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Grief for the father she'd never truly known, anger at the lies that had shaped her childhood, but also a profound sense of relief. The truth, as painful as it was, felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. "So," she said finally, picking up the wooden spoon she'd abandoned earlier, "shall we finish this stuffing?" Arthur's face broke into a genuine smile, the first Olivia had seen in years. "Yes," he said. "Let's finish it. Together." As they worked, adding a pinch of the secret herb to the mixture, Olivia realized that this Christmas, while not the one she'd expected, might just be the most important one of their lives. It was a time for healing, for forgiveness, and for a new beginning built on the foundation of truth. The aroma of roasting turkey and herb stuffing filled the Wheeler home, mingling with the scent of pine from the Christmas tree in the living room. Olivia stood at the kitchen window, watching fat snowflakes drift lazily past the colorful lights strung outside. Behind her, She could hear Megan and their grandfather setting the table, the gentle clink of silverware and the low murmur of their voices a comforting backdrop. So much had changed in the span of a few hours. The family secrets, hidden for decades, had been brought to light. Yet instead of tearing them apart as Olivia had feared, the truth seemed to have forged a stronger bond between them. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Megan's voice broke through Olivia's reverie. She turned to find her sister leaning against the counter, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She offered one to Olivia. "Thanks," Olivia said, taking a sip. "I was just thinking, how do we move forward from here? Knowing what we know now." Megan considered this for a moment. "I think we honor the sacrifices that were made. Grandma Ellie, Grandpa, even Dad in his own way. They all did what they thought was best, even if we might not agree with their methods." Olivia nodded slowly. "You're right, and maybe we use this as a chance to start fresh. No more secrets, no more hidden truths." "I'll drink to that," Megan said, clinking her glass against Olivia's. From the dining room, they heard their grandfather call out, "Girls, a little help in here." Exchanging a smile, the sisters made their way to the dining room. They found Arthur struggling with a tangled string of lights he'd insisted on adding to the table decorations. "Here, Grandpa, let me help," Olivia said, gently taking the lights from him. As she worked to untangle them, she noticed a clarity in Arthur's eyes that had been missing for so long. The secret herb, it seemed, was indeed working its magic. "You know," Arthur said, his voice stronger than it had been in months, "your grandmother would be proud of you both, the way you've handled all this. She always said the Wheeler women were made of strong stuff." Megan laughed softly. "Sounds like Grandma was quite a woman. I wish we'd had the chance to know her better." "Oh, she was something else," Arthur agreed, a wistful smile on his face. "Tough as nails when she needed to be, but with a heart of gold. She's the one who taught me that family is everything, that you stand by your own, no matter what." As Olivia finished arranging the lights, casting a warm glow over the table, a thought struck her. "Grandpa," she said slowly, do you think Dad ever wanted to come back? To explain things himself?" Arthur's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep contemplation. "I think he wanted to more than anything, but he was afraid of the harm it might do of dredging up the past. In his letters, Megan interrupted, her eyes wide. "He wrote to you?" Arthur nodded. "Every Christmas, kept us updated on his life, asked about you girls. I've kept them all these years, hidden away with Ellie's recipe box. I thought someday you might want to read them." Olivia and Megan exchanged a look, a mix of emotions passing between them. Curiosity, apprehension, a glimmer of hope. "I think we'd like that, Grandpa," Olivia said softly. Maybe after dinner?" Arthur reached out, patting Olivia's hand. "Of course, sweetheart. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world now to sort through the past." Just then, the oven timer chimed, signaling that dinner was ready. The 3 of them moved in concert, a well-practiced dance of bringing dishes to the table, carving the turkey, and finally settling into their seats. As they began to serve themselves, Olivia couldn't help but marvel at the stuffing. Golden brown and fragrant, it looked like any other Christmas stuffing. Yet she knew it held within it a powerful secret, one that had brought both clarity and healing to their family. "Before we eat," Arthur said, raising his glass, "I'd like to propose a toast to family, to truth, and to new beginnings." To family, truth, and new beginnings, Olivia and Megan echoed, their glasses clinking together. As they dug into their meal, the conversation flowed freely. Stories of Christmases past, memories of their grandmother that Arthur shared with newfound clarity, and tentative plans for the future. There was laughter, a few tears, and a palpable sense of relief that hung in the air. Olivia found herself watching her grandfather closely. The fog of confusion that had clouded his eyes for so long seemed to have lifted, at least for now. She knew the effects of the herb wouldn't last forever, that the Alzheimer's would eventually reclaim its hold. But for this moment, this precious Christmas dinner, they had him back fully. As the evening wore on and the plates were cleared, Arthur rose from his seat. "I think it's time," he said, his voice steady. "Time for you girls to read those letters." Olivia and Megan followed him to his study, where he retrieved a bundle of envelopes, held together with a faded ribbon. As he handed them over, Olivia felt the weight of years of unspoken words in her hands. "Take your time," Arthur said gently. "And remember, no matter what's in those letters, your father loved you both very much. He may have made mistakes, but his love for you was never one of them." As Olivia and Megan settled onto the old leather couch in the study, the bundle of letters between them, they knew that their Christmas night was far from over. They were about to embark on a journey through time, guided by the words of a father they thought they'd lost long ago. In the soft glow of the Christmas lights, surrounded by the warmth of newfound truth and understanding, the Wheeler family began the process of healing, of forgiveness, and of rediscovering the bonds that had always held them together, hidden though they may have been. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its resonant tones echoing through the quiet house. Olivia and Megan sat side by side on the worn leather couch in their grandfather's study, surrounded by a sea of opened envelopes and unfolded letters. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, giving the scene an almost dreamlike quality. Olivia's eyes burned from hours of reading, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Each letter was a window into a life she'd never known, the life of a father who had become a stranger in order to protect his family. Frank Wheeler's words, penned over decades, told a story of regret, hope, and a love that never diminished despite the distance. "Listen to this," Megan said softly, her voice thick with emotion. She held up a letter dated Christmas Eve, 1985. "My dearest girls, today you are 10 and 8 years old. I imagine you opening presents under the tree, your faces lit up with joy. I wish more than anything I could be there with you. Know that even though I'm far away, my heart is always with you. I hope that someday, when you're older, you'll understand why I had to leave, and that you'll find it in your hearts to forgive me." Olivia felt tears welling up in her eyes. "He never stopped thinking about us, did he?" Megan shook her head, wiping at her own eyes. "Every letter, every year. He kept track of our birthdays, our achievements. He knew about my soccer trophies and your science fair wins." "How did he know all that?" "Grandpa," Olivia realized. "He must have been writing back, keeping Dad informed about our lives." As if summoned by their conversation, there was a soft knock at the study door. Arthur stood in the doorway, looking more alert than he had in years, though the late hour had left dark circles under his eyes. "How are you girls holding up?" he asked gently. Olivia and Megan exchanged a glance. "It's overwhelming," Olivia admitted. "But in a good way, I think. It's like we're getting to know Dad all over again." Arthur nodded, making his way to his old armchair across from the couch. "Your father was a good man who made a terrible mistake, but he spent the rest of his life trying to make amends in the only way he could. By staying away," Megan said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "By ensuring you had a chance at a normal life," Arthur corrected gently. "Free from the shadow of his mistakes, from the danger his actions had brought to our doorstep." Olivia leaned forward, curiosity burning in her chest. "Grandpa, what exactly happened that night? The night Dad disappeared?" Arthur sighed heavily, his eyes taking on a faraway look. "Your father had gotten involved with some dangerous people. Loan sharks, the kind of men you don't want to owe money to. He'd managed to pay them back, but they wanted more. They threatened not just him, but all of us." The sisters listened, spellbound, as Arthur recounted the events of that fateful Christmas Eve. How Frank had arrived at their door, desperate and afraid. How Ellie had used the secret herb to clear his mind, allowing them to form a plan. The staged car accident, the painful goodbyes, the promise to keep the girls safe at any cost. "We thought it was the only way," Arthur finished, his voice barely above a whisper, "to keep you safe, to give Frank a chance to start over. But the price, The price was so high. Silence fell over the study as the weight of the revelation settled around them. Olivia found herself staring at the framed family photo on her grandfather's desk. A snapshot of happier times, before secrets and lies had torn their family apart. "I think I understand now," Megan said slowly. "Why you and Grandma did what you did. Why Dad stayed away. But I can't help wondering, what if? What if he had stayed? What if we had faced it all together as a family?" Arthur reached out, taking one of each of their hands in his. "We can't change the past, my dears, but we can learn from it. Your grandmother's last wish, her purpose in leaving that recipe and the truth behind it, was for us to heal, to come together again as a family, with no more secrets between us." Olivia nodded, a sense of resolve settling over her. "Then that's what we'll do, starting now." As the first light of dawn began to peek through the study windows, the three Wheelers sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. They spoke of Frank, of Ellie, of the years lost and the memories cherished. It was a catharsis long overdue, a chance to finally grieve and celebrate as a family united. When the sun had fully risen, casting a golden glow across the snow-covered yard, Olivia stood and stretched. "I think it's time for some breakfast. Who's up for some Christmas morning pancakes?" Megan grinned, the first genuine smile Olivia had seen on her sister's face in hours. "Only if we use Grandma's secret recipe." Arthur chuckled, rising from his chair with a groan. "I think we've had enough secrets for one lifetime. How about we make them the old-fashioned way?" Together, as they made their way to the kitchen, the house seemed to come alive around them. The Christmas tree lights twinkled merrily, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Olivia realized that for the first time in years, she felt truly at home. This Christmas had brought pain and revelation, but it had also brought healing. As she watched her grandfather and sister playfully argue over the proper pancake flipping technique, Olivia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family whole, honest, and stronger than ever. The days following Christmas passed in a blur of emotion and activity for the Wheeler family. Olivia and Megan, having taken extended leave from their jobs, threw themselves into the task of helping their grandfather sort through decades of memories stored in the attic and tucked away in forgotten corners of the house. Each box opened, each album leafed through, brought new revelations. Photos of their father that they'd never seen before, mementos from his new life that Arthur had kept hidden away. It was like putting together a puzzle, slowly forming a complete picture of the man Frank Wheeler had been both before and after his disappearance. On New Year's Eve, as the rest of the world prepared to celebrate, the Wheelers gathered in the living room. The coffee table was covered with photo albums, letters, and keepsakes. In the center sat the ornate box containing Ellie's secret herb, a silent reminder of the catalyst that had brought them to this moment. "I think it's time we decide what to do with all of this," Arthur said, gesturing to the spread before them. "Your grandmother wanted the truth to come out, but what we do with that truth is up to us." Olivia and Megan exchanged a glance. They'd spent countless hours over the past week discussing this very question. "We want to know everything, Grandpa," Olivia said firmly. "No more secrets, no more hidden truths. Whatever you know about Dad's life after he left, we want to hear it all." Arthur nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension on his face. "All right then, you might want to get comfortable. It's a long story." As the winter night deepened outside, Arthur began to recount the details of Frank's new life. How he'd moved to a small town in Oregon, changed his name, and started over from scratch. He told them about Frank's job as a high school history teacher, his volunteer work at a local youth center, his quiet efforts to make amends for his past mistakes. "He never remarried," Arthur said softly. "Never had any other children. He said his heart was always here with his girls." Megan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "Did he ever consider coming back? Explaining everything to us in person?" Arthur sighed heavily. "He wanted to. Every year, he'd write about how much he missed you, how he dreamed of seeing you again. But the risk, The men he'd been involved with, they had long memories and far-reaching influence. He was afraid that showing up would put you in danger all over again. Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. The image of her father, living a solitary life, always looking over his shoulder, broke her heart. Was he at least happy in the end? A small smile played at the corners of Arthur's mouth. I think he found a kind of peace. In his last letter, he wrote about feeling like he'd finally paid his debts, not just the monetary ones, but the moral ones. He said he was ready to face whatever came next with a clear conscience. As Arthur's words hung in the air, the grandfather clock began to chime, signaling the arrival of the new year. Through the window, they could hear distant cheers and the pop of fireworks. Megan stood abruptly, walking to the mantelpiece where a framed photo of Frank stood. She picked it up, studying it intently. I think I'm ready to forgive him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia joined her sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Me too," she agreed. "And maybe it's time we forgive ourselves too, for all the anger and resentment we've carried all these years." Arthur watched his granddaughters with pride and love shining in his eyes. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you both. This is exactly what she hoped for: healing, forgiveness, a chance for our family to move forward together." As the first minutes of the new year ticked by, the Wheelers found themselves sharing stories and laughter, remembering Frank not just as the man who left, but as the father who had loved them from afar, who had carried them in his heart every day of his life. When the eastern sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn, Olivia stood and stretched. "I have an idea," she said, a spark of excitement in her voice. "Why don't we take a trip to Oregon? See where Dad lived. Maybe talk to people who knew him there." Megan's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Yes, we could make it a family road trip, like we used to do when we were kids." They both turned to Arthur, who chuckled at their enthusiasm. "Well, I'm not as spry as I used to be, but I think I could manage a road trip, especially if it means seeing the place your father called home." As they began to excitedly plan their journey, Olivia felt a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The pain of the past would always be a part of them, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it had become a foundation upon which they could build a stronger, more honest future. Looking around at her small but mighty family, Olivia realized that Grandma Ellie's last gift hadn't just been the truth. It had been the chance for all of them to rediscover what family truly meant. And as they stood together, watching the first sunrise of the new year, Olivia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound not just by blood, but by a love that had endured secrets, separation, and time itself. The Wheelers were whole again, their story no longer fragmented by half-truths and omissions. And in that wholeness, they had found a new beginning. The Oregon coastline stretched out before them, a rugged tapestry of rocky cliffs and windswept beaches. Olivia gripped the steering wheel of the rented SUV, stealing glances at her passengers. Megan sat beside her, maps spread across her lap, while Arthur dozed in the back seat, his face peaceful in the warm afternoon sun. Their journey had taken them across the country, following the faded trail of Frank Wheeler's second life. Each mile had brought them closer not just to their destination, but to a deeper understanding of the man their father had become. "There," Megan said suddenly, pointing to a sign. "Ocean View. Population 3,542. This is it." Olivia felt her heart rate quicken as she took the exit. This small coastal town had been their father's home for over 3 decades. What would they find here? What remnants of Frank Wheeler's life remained? As they drove down Main Street, Arthur stirred in the back seat. "It's just like he described it," he murmured, his eyes taking in the quaint storefronts and friendly faces of locals going about their day. Said it reminded him of home, but with an ocean view. They pulled into the parking lot of a small bed and breakfast that Arthur had insisted on booking. "Your father mentioned it in one of his letters," he'd explained. "Said it was run by one of the kindest families he'd ever met." As they climbed out of the car, stretching travel-weary limbs, the B&B's front door opened. A woman in her 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile, stepped out to greet them. "You must be the Wheelers," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm Martha Donovan. We've been expecting you." Olivia exchanged a surprised glance with Megan. They hadn't told anyone in town they were coming. Before she could ask, Martha continued. "Arthur called ahead," she explained, giving their grandfather a knowing look. "Said you were here to learn about James Turner." It took Olivia a moment to realize that James Turner had been her father's assumed name, the name he'd lived under for most of her life. As Martha ushered them inside, chattering about fresh-baked cookies and the best local sights, Olivia felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. They were about to step into the world their father had built for himself, a world that had been separate from theirs for so long. Over the next few days, Ocean View revealed itself to them, one story at a time. They visited the high school where Frank, or James, as he was known here, had taught history, inspiring a generation of students. His former colleagues spoke of a man dedicated to his work, always willing to go the extra mile for a struggling student. They walked along the beach where he'd spent countless hours, according to Martha, lost in thought as he stared out at the horizon. Olivia couldn't help but wonder if he'd been thinking of them during those solitary moments. But it was at the local youth center that the full impact of Frank's life in Ocean View hit home. A plaque near the entrance bore his assumed name, in memory of James Turner, whose tireless dedication changed countless lives. Inside, they met Tom, the center's current director, who had known Frank for years. James was the heart and soul of this place, Tom told them, his voice full of admiration. He poured everything he had into helping kids who were heading down the wrong path. Said he was trying to prevent others from making the same mistakes he had. As Tom shared stories of the lives Frank had touched, the teenagers he'd mentored and guided towards better futures, Olivia felt a fierce pride welling up inside her. The father she'd thought she'd lost had become a beacon of hope for so many others. That evening, as they sat on the B&B's porch, watching the sun dip below the Pacific, Arthur pulled out a final envelope from his jacket pocket. "Your father left this with Martha," he explained, handing it to Olivia. "Asked her to give it to his family if they ever came looking." With trembling hands, Olivia opened the letter, Megan leaning in close to read alongside her. "My beloved daughters," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've learned the truth, and you've found your way to the place I called home for so many years. I hope that in coming here, you've seen that although I was absent from your lives, I never stopped being your father. Every child I helped here, I did it in your names, hoping that somehow the good I did might balance the scales against the pain I caused you. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to it. But I want you to know that you were my first and last thoughts every day. My greatest regret was not watching you grow up, but my greatest pride was knowing that you became strong, beautiful women despite my absence. I love you, Olivia and Megan. I have always loved you, and I always will. Your father, Frank." As Olivia finished reading, her voice choked with emotion. She looked up to see tears streaming down Megan's face. Even Arthur, who had heard so many of Frank's words over the years, was wiping at his eyes. In that moment, as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to twinkle overhead, Olivia felt a sense of completion. The jagged edges of her family's broken history were finally smoothing out, forming a picture that, while imperfect, was whole. The journey back to their hometown was quieter, more reflective. Each member of the Wheeler family carried with them new memories, a deeper understanding, and a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. As they pulled into the driveway of the old family home, Olivia was struck by how different it looked to her now. The weight of secrets that had seemed to hang over the place was gone, replaced by a warm sense of homecoming. In the days that followed, they fell into a new routine. Arthur's moments of clarity, bolstered by regular small doses of Ellie's herb in his morning tea, became more frequent. He regaled his granddaughters with stories of their grandmother, filling in the gaps of a family history that had been fragmented for too long. Olivia and Megan, for their part, began the process of sorting through their father's letters and mementos, creating a scrapbook that told the full story of Frank Wheeler's life, both the years they'd known and those they'd missed. It was during one of these sorting sessions, about a week after their return, that Megan suddenly sat up straight, a gleam in her eye. "Liv," she said, excitement coloring her voice. "I have an idea." Olivia looked up from the photo album she'd been arranging. "What is it?" "The youth center in Ocean View," Megan began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "What if we set up a scholarship in Dad's name, for kids who want to turn their lives around like he did?" Olivia felt a smile spread across her face. "Megan, that's brilliant. It's exactly what Dad would have wanted." Over the next few months, the James Turner Second Chance Scholarship took shape. The Wheeler sisters threw themselves into the project, reaching out to their father's former colleagues and students in Ocean View, raising funds and setting up the framework for a program that would help troubled youth find their way to a better future. As spring bloomed around them, bringing new life to the gardens Ellie had once tended so lovingly, the Wheelers prepared for a trip back to Ocean View. This time, it wasn't just to visit. It was to present the first scholarship awards. Standing at the podium in the Ocean View High School auditorium, Olivia looked out at the sea of faces. She saw hope in the eyes of the scholarship recipients, pride in the faces of their families, and a deep appreciation from the townspeople who had known James Turner. "My sister and I never had the chance to know our father as the man you knew him," Olivia began, her voice steady and clear. "But through your stories, your memories, we've come to understand the depth of his commitment to second chances. Today, we're honored to continue that legacy." As she spoke about the scholarship, about the transformative power of forgiveness and the strength found in facing one's past, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was how they would honor Frank's memory, not by dwelling on what was lost, but by creating opportunities for others to find their way, just as he had. Later that evening, as the Wheelers gathered on Martha's B&B porch once more, Arthur raised a glass of lemonade in a toast. "To Frank," he said, his voice wavering slightly with emotion, "and to Ellie. May their love, in all its complicated glory, continue to guide us." "To Mom and Dad," Megan added, her eyes shining. "To family," Olivia finished, "in all its forms." As they clinked glasses, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Olivia realized that their family's story hadn't ended with the revelation of long-buried secrets. Rather, it had begun a new chapter, one of healing, of purpose, and of a love that transcended time and distance. The secret recipe, hidden away for so long, had indeed been the key to everything. Not just to unlocking the past, but to opening the door to a future filled with understanding, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As night fell over Ocean View, stars twinkling into view above the peaceful Pacific, the Wheelers sat together, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. They had found their way back to each other, and in doing so, had discovered the true meaning of Ellie's final gift, the recipe for a family made whole again. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.